MURTAGH, 5 stars, had a ton of fun reading it. Let's talk about it. So here we are in 2023. It is officially, I want to say like 18 years at least since the publication of Eragon. And a lot's happened in that time. You know, he published Eldest in 2006, Brisingar in 2008, and Inheritance in 2011. And then he went radio silent on the series for a while until 2018. Back in the early days of the series, I was much more involved in the fandom online. This was before I even had, a Facebook account. I was just finding fan sites, looking for news about the books. Like, I was really into it. I was about 22 at the time. The one that I remember was called, I think it was just like shortagal.com or something. Like, that was the name of dragon riders in the ancient language. I was way more, ear to the ground with the series than I am now. So like I said in my Eragon recap video, I wasn't even aware that he was working on this, that he was doing another one, or that he was planning on following up with something after that. I knew that he had a book that came out in 2018. It was a collection of 3 short stories set in the same world with the same characters. But I didn't read that one until just last week because, the main story was done. If he was going to write short stories at that point, I was like, oh, it's fine, but I'm kind of out of that one. I'm tuned out of it. I got what I wanted to out of the story. I wasn't too interested in continuing on with, a brief anthology. That was for more of the diehards, and maybe I was closer to that at one point, but I'm not anymore. But, in preparation for this one, I checked out The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm, and I'm glad that I did, just because it re-primed me to know what to expect, not just from this world, but more from his writing style. It needs to be emphasized, I think, with some regularity, that he wrote the first version of Eragon in his mid-teens. And, as impressive a feat as that was, if you do something then for the next 25 years, you develop and you grow a lot more as a writer. And seeing the contrasting tone between that first book and this most recent one, you can see his development and his growth as a writer. And I think it's an especially important feat to see how he's able to keep the same kind of voice and tone for this world while still showing in subtle ways how he's gotten better at telling stories and showing what's going on in this fictional setting that he's made. As far as The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm, the Fork story is one about MURTAGH. It's a short one that you get to see from a different perspective in this book. The Witch, that focuses on the character Angela. She's the main value of that story is that it shows that there are other worlds beyond Alagasia. It expands the scope of the place. And then The Worm was a story from an Urgal's perspective. Those are the pseudo-orcs of this world, we'll say. Alagasia is very heavily inspired by Tolkien. That's just kind of obvious. And it's not like Paolini shied away from that or anything either. I'm not saying that he was trying to pull a fast one on us. It's a very heavily Tolkien-esque world. It's, dragon, elves, dwarves, all that stuff. The Urgals are a creation of his own. And while they were generally kind of cannon fodder in the first book because they'd been, captured by an evil shade and he forced them to do all this bad stuff, he's kind of rehabbed them as far as fantasy creatures go and shown us a better and more noble side of them. They are still family and clan oriented and stuff. They're not evil. They just live in a primally different way from the other races of Alagasia. The main character in that one was a girl who was trying to outwit a dragon that had been causing problems for her clan for a while, and there was some merit to it. It was just one of those things that kind of colored and filled out the world. That whole book was much more for the dedicated fans of the series than it was, as far as being like accessible to an outsider. But the Fork story, basically, MURTAGH shows up to meet some contacts of his at a tavern to get some information. They double cross him and try to kill him. He tries to use magic on them and it doesn't work, which is a whole other problem, and it's got major ramifications for the world that he's in. But using a simple tavern fork and casting some magic on that, he's able to defeat them, showing his cleverness and his cunning, and that even though he's got this magical super weapon, which is the name of names, the name of the ancient language itself, he's not so over-reliant on that or dependent on it to the point where it handicaps him. He's able to think outside the box. He is a clever and a logical thinker as a result of what he's been through, the forging process that made him. Now, the basic plot of this book is that MURTAGH is on a redemption quest. He was the son of a very, very bad man who was involved in the torture and killing and suffering of a lot of people. Obviously, he's not responsible for that, but in a world where your lineage matters and people put a lot of stock in where you come from and who raised you, he's got to get that reputation off of him. And it would have been a lot easier if he hadn't been captured in the second book and then manipulated and tortured and had his mind broken by the evil king, who then turned around and, using magic, forced him to go all Winter Soldier on everybody and become just a pain to the world at large. And that's largely what people know him for, was the role that he played in the war, especially the big high-profile players that he killed. In Eldest, in Book 2, he killed King Hrothgar, the king of the dwarves. In Briziger, Book 3, he killed Oramus and Glader, another rider and another dragon. That was a huge deal. These are things that you get to see him answer for in unique ways in this book. I'm going to keep this review as spoiler-free as possible. I'll put that in the title. But I'm going to generally hint at certain things. Reason being that I want you to know that you can go into this book expecting satisfaction. Over the last several years, as I've gotten excited for books that were going to come out, whether they were first in a series that sounded promising or a long-awaited sequel to something, I have more often than not been disappointed. And that's been exceedingly frustrating for me as a reader, somebody who used to get really hyped up and really into a series, and then you go and pick it up and it's just kind of, wow, like this was extremely unsatisfying. This didn't give us closure on several key points of character development or plot or anything like that. Like, no, I expect that Paolini knows what his readers want, and he gives it to them, although he might not give it to them in the way that they expect. He comes at it from a very, we'll say, like mature and refined angle. But we'll get into that as we go. While the main story is a redemption quest, it is spotted with smaller quests along the way, kind of preparatory things that lead up to the main thing that he's looking for. In that tavern encounter where the informants double-crossed him, he found out that they had some sort of magical protection that they had gotten from a witch named Bashel, and her magic was not based on words, which all the magic in the first 4 books leading up to this one was. There was a whole language. Like I said, you use the language, you're able to control a thing. Language was very important for harnessing magic, redirecting energy, all of that. The magic that this witch uses is completely divorced from language, which is why him knowing the name of the language didn't work on them. And that opens up a whole other can of worms. It presents a new series of dangers that he has to address. And so, fans of The Fork, the Witch, and the Worm who have been looking for a resolution to that story for the last 5 years, you're going to get it in this one. It does take a while to get there. Partway through, we'll say the first act, the first third of the book, MURTAGH comes across a werecat named Carabel, who at first sends him on a series of what seems like kind of like pointless MacGuffin hunt quests, but the way that Paolini presents them, it's not so much about the quest as much as it is about what MURTAGH learns about himself and what he has to do to kind of develop himself and deal with the ghost of his past along the way. This was never more poignant than it was during like one of the first phases of this. This is the only thing that I'm even going to remotely spoil. One of these quests takes him to a monument that was built over Glader's grave, the dragon that he killed in Book 3. And he has to square with the role that he played in the war directly. He's got to deal with the fact that, like, yes, he was magically compelled to go and fight and kill Oramus and Glader. He didn't really have his agency there. He did have his agency for other kills, though. And there are even times when he has to confess to a very important character, yes, I didn't have to kill this person. I killed them in war because I was angry. And there are elements of that he does have to take ownership of. That's huge. I thought that was very impressive, and it was very bold of Paolini to deal with it in that way, because this is a character whose ill deeds you could very easily excuse because he was enslaved. He was magically forced to do all of the bad things that he did. But it comes to the surface that he didn't have to do all of the things that he did. He was angry about his situation, and he was lashing out and taking it out on others, but he understands that that's not an excuse, it's just what happened. And he's willing to face the consequences of that. That accountability is extremely admirable in a character like this, one who could very easily write off what he did as not his fault. These little stacked side quests, these MacGuffin hunts, they do eventually lead to the discovery of Bashel, you know, an understanding of who she is, why she's dangerous, what she's doing, what's going on around her. And I'm trying to dance around what goes on from here because it's most of what remains in the story. Suffice to say that it ends, or it becomes very, very dangerous for MURTAGH and Thorn for a while. In fact, they get trapped again. This was a concern that they both had. You know, throughout the story, they're both dealing with their phobias that they have developed as a result of their enslavement. You know, MURTAGH is extremely wary of making oaths or swearing fealty to anybody because that was how he was ensnared by Galbatorix. Granted, Galbatorix forced him to make oaths in the ancient language, which then magically bound his will to Galbatorix. Nobody forces him to do this here, but he's still very, very wary of making an oath that he doesn't want to uphold. Thorn, for his part, is extremely claustrophobic, and you get glimpses into his past and, you know, how from a hatchling, Galbatorix tortured him and played off of his suffering and MURTAGH's suffering to bring them both to heal. Like, even though he had magic, he had to break them against each other in order to turn them into tools that he could then use against Eragon and the Varden and the rebellion. It was heartbreaking. It was also, it was a throwback to the very thorough style of writing that he did in the first 4 books, which were at times overly drawn out, and I felt like there were some times when this one was as well, but taken in the aggregate, taken as a whole, that's just his writing style for these books. It's the kind of books that they are, and in book 5 of 5, you've got to know that going into it. There are going to be parts that feel like they're a little bit too much, but he's writing a very well-developed world. That's just what he likes to do. Speed it up if you aren't too much of a fan of that. I know there are times when I'm not, but it is what it is. You know, it's not like it was a sucker punch or a surprise or a deviation from his previous writing style. But the glimpses into MURTAGH's past and Thorn's past and seeing how they are trying to overcome those things and rely on each other in a way that, you know, Dragon and Rider do. They really only have each other in this world, and you know, they're looking for redemption, and they feel like this is the way to do it. These smaller quests that lead up to the bigger quests, they're all redemption quests. They are, you know, MURTAGH trying to make a better name for himself. You know, he can't go out and say who he is because people know the name of MURTAGH, Morzan's son, and that he's bad, he's a traitor, he's a betrayer. It even says that, like, on the monument to Glader, you know, MURTAGH the betrayer. He's like, crap, you know, how do I clear my name? He's got to live a lifetime of good works, right, to offset the bad. And there are still going to be people that generationally never forgive him for what he did. But in the meantime, like, regardless of what people think about him, if he has the awareness of an even greater threat out there, like this witch, for whom regular magical rules do not apply, he doesn't want the world to come under the subjugation of, you know, her power the way that it was under Galbatorix's power just up until recently. So he doesn't want things to go back to the way they were, or perhaps even worse. So, you know, despite the danger, he's going to run at this problem head on and see if he can't solve it. That's heroism, you know, especially for a character who has every expectation in the world that he will not be appreciated. I think that's what makes MURTAGH a much more compelling protagonist than Eragon. Eragon is, you know, the Luke Skywalker. He's innocent to begin with. You expect him to develop into a hero along the way. He trips and stumbles and falls a little bit. He makes a few mistakes, and then he saves the day. MURTAGH was kind of damned from the start, broken in the process, and putting himself back together in a world that isn't really interested in his redemption. So the conclusion to this book, it's great, it's epic in scope, not going to spoil anything on that front. But again, like I reiterate that I give it a very enthusiastic 5 stars, and maybe at some point down the road I'll do a spoiler video and we can talk about all that stuff in the comments so you can be a little bit more free about it. Maybe I will go look up one of those fan sites and have some discussions or something. I guess people do that on Reddit. I'm not on Reddit. I haven't been for years. It's really not my scene. But I would like to have a discussion with people about this because it's fun to get into this world and to want to talk about the elements in it. I thought another thing that was really impressive in this was how he handled MURTAGH's romance, feels like the wrong word, but his love for the character Nasuada. We didn't really get to see a whole lot of that in the 4th book, in Inheritance, but it was a key plot point because while she was in captivity, while Galbatorix had her in captivity, MURTAGH fell in love with her, and that changed his true internal nature. Remember the thing where they have, true names, internal names, and if somebody else knows your true name, they can use magic to control you. Galbatorix forced MURTAGH to give him his true name, etc., but your deeds can change your true name. This was one of the coping and healing things that MURTAGH and Thorn did, where every night they recited their true names to each other as part of a way of kind of anchoring themselves, reminding themselves of who they are and keeping themselves accountable to each other. Well, back in the 4th book, while MURTAGH was falling in love with Nasuada, that act of being able to love her changed his true name, and it changed the nature of his arrangement with Galbatorix, and it allowed him to kind of break through and give the name of the language to Eragon, and that led to the conclusion of that book. That wasn't just a plot mechanism, though. MURTAGH was very much in love with Nasuada, but obviously the new queen of the kingdom, can't choose the betrayer of the kingdom as her love interest, and so he's kind of damned if you do, damned if you don't, except it's mostly like damned if you can't, and he can't do anything about that. It's really out of his hands. But in all of the moments where MURTAGH is kind of like thinking about her, reflecting on her, pining for her, hearing news about her, it was never about the kind of things that romance normally is in these kinds of books, in these fantasy books. It wasn't about like how beautiful she was and how he got all Twitter-pated over her. Like Paolini was able to write a very real love that a man like MURTAGH would have for a woman like Nasuada. The role that she played in making him a complete person and bringing him back from the edge. Like that's more profound than just the fun and frilly parts of love. I talk with my wife a lot about teen romance books and how really like they play with the hormones and stuff and the funny frilly emotions, but there's not a whole lot in that genre that's about because it's for teenagers, that's about building a life together and growing together the way that you would in a more serious relationship and in a marriage. But this was a very serious and a very real love, and maybe I wouldn't have been able to appreciate that earlier in life, especially the last time I read an Eragon book, which was probably like right before I got married. So I have a perspective in life where I'm able to appreciate that particular component of the story a lot more than I might have at a younger age. So he handled that extremely well. And if for some reason you have watched this far into the video, despite me saying I'm not going to spoil anything, I won't spoil anything here, but just plug your fingers in your ears in case you're even remotely apprehensive about that. That scene at the end where he does get to meet Nasuada and they have a tete-a-tete, a meeting, a confrontation seems like too contentious of a word, but they have to square with each other. And he's got to answer for what he did in Eldest. She tells him what Hrothgar meant to her, and he's got to cop to the fact that I didn't have to kill him, but I did. She's much more understanding, probably as a function of her role as queen of the new kingdom or whatever. She's she's much more understanding of his situation, even though the loss of Hrothgar and of her father, still hurts. He's not responsible for Ajihad's death, but he did play a role in the loss of someone very close to her, and she can't just shrug that off, but she's not so quick to damn him either. You get to see just a little bit of reciprocation there, and that was wonderful. He handled all of that with a very deft and talented hand. So if I have any quibbles or complaints for the story, as I said, there were times when it did feel a little bit too drawn out. The first third of the book, I was just loving it, no complaints at all. And then I feel like right around the time he did the third kind of mini quest leading up to the bigger quest, to the discovery of Bashel and all that, I was like, okay, this isn't going as quickly as it did before. It's a little bit protracted, but I kind of knew going into that there was going to be some element of that. Once he meets Bashel and everything that happens from there, like, even though it's good and informative and clever and generally good writing, I still would have liked it to pick up the pace a little bit more, but I understand that that's a me thing, not the book thing, so I didn't hold it against the book. Lit RPG fans are probably punching air right now. So why couldn't you have that same feeling about Lit RPG? Lit RPG is a different animal. We're not going to talk about that here. Anyway, there was a goal to this story. There was a resolution, there was growth along the way for a very compelling pair of characters, because while it is called MURTAGH, it isn't just about MURTAGH, it's about Thorn. And you get to see Thorn grow too. You even get to see Thorn go on a little Hulk smash spree, which was, I'm sure, satisfying for him as it was for the reader. Very well done book, and I'm very pleased that I got to read it and have such a fun experience with it. It's a serious book, but it does have levity, even if it's short on humor. The important thing is that all throughout, it does hold on to hope. MURTAGH is a character with attributes that you would want to emulate. Even though he is a broken man at the beginning, he is still working his way towards acts of heroism and nobility, even if he's not thinking of them as such. He's just a man with a lot of bad things in his past who wants to do the right thing. And that's what I'd like to read more of personally. So let me know what you guys thought of this book, if you had as much fun reading it as I did, if you got any complaints, what were your favorite moments, the whole rigmarole. If you like what I do here, please subscribe. You guys know how to do that YouTube bit, like, share, comment, so on and so forth. I appreciate it. The channel has grown a lot this year. I got monetized finally just a couple of months ago, and I now have as many as 7 videos with over 1,000 views. It might seem like a very small thing. I'm very small in comparison to other stuff, but I'm only growing. The numbers are only going up, and I'm looking forward to more. You guys are going to play a huge part of that. So as long as we can keep finding things that we all like to talk about and go off about them here, then that's great. That's all I'm asking for. So drive safe. See you out there.